All right, we're going to go over some firewall configuration that we need to make to comply with security standards, specifically items 8, 9, and 10. SSH must be restricted to approved source IP addresses. We're going to make it so that we can only SSH from CNT serve and the VPN subnet. The firewall must be running and should only allow inbound access to required services. So we're going to examine what the firewall is currently allowing and probably remove almost everything. The firewall must be configured to log dropped SSH packets. So we want to know if somebody's trying to SSH in from somewhere they shouldn't be. Those are the direct things. And indirectly, we're going to implement number 5. The system must not allow clear text management or file transfer. By not allowing it through the firewall, we will make sure that it is compliant with number 5. So first thing you want to do, make sure you're connected to the VPN, SSH to your system as root. We're still using root to log in because we haven't made our users administrative users yet. So once you're logged in, we're going to look at the status of the firewall service, which is called firewalld. We use a system control command, status firewalld to look at that. It says it's active and running, so that's perfect. Next thing we want to do is examine what the firewall is currently doing. So we'll use the firewall command to examine the current state of the firewall. So firewall command get active zones will tell us which zones are currently active. It says the public zone is active. And if we want to look at what the public zone is allowing, the command firewall command dash dash zone equal public dash dash list all will show us that. So currently our firewall is running only using the public zone. It is letting in cockpit, DHCP v6 client, and SSH, hitting the default target, which is to reject. So anything that doesn't match these 3 services will be rejected. So yeah, firewalld is the zone-based firewall. So there are some predefined zones that we can look at. We're going to want to have a trusted network that we allow to SSH in, and then we're going to want to have what else is allowed from the public. So we're going to keep the public zone, but we want to find a zone that we can use for the internal traffic. So I'm going to look at the trusted zone, and the way we do that is with a similar command to what we looked at with the public zone. We just change the zone to trusted. We look at the trusted zone, the target is accept, so that means it's going to let everything in, which is not what I want. There's another zone called internal, which might be more along the lines of what I'm looking for. And if we look at the internal zone, it's allowing some services in, a few, and the target's default, which is going to drop what's not allowed. So this zone is what I'm going to use to modify who's allowed to SSH in. So first thing I'm going to do with this zone is I'm going to delete some of those services that I don't need. So I don't need anything but SSH on this zone. And the way we do that is firewall command dash dash zone equal internal, remove dash service equals cockpit. So this will remove the cockpit service. Before I continue, we should probably have a little conversation about how this firewall config is stored on your system. It's stored in some files that get read when the system is started or stopped, or the service is started or stopped or reloaded, and when the system is booted. So if I make a change in this way, it modifies the runtime config and is activated immediately. Another way I could make the change is by typing permanent, and this modifies the permanent config. So this modifies those config files, but it does not activate that change to the running config. So if you were to do it this way, you would then need to reload the config to get it to be in effect. I don't like doing it that way. I like modifying the runtime config and then saving it at the end. In that way, if I mess something up, I can just reboot the server, and when it comes back up, the firewall will be back to what it used to be. So keep that in mind as we're making the changes. So I'm going to remove cockpit. I'm going to remove DHCP v6 client because we're not doing DHCP v6 on our network. I'm going to remove MDNS, and I'm going to remove Samba client. So those are the commands to remove the services we don't want. If I look at the config again, I see all that's left is SSH, which is good. One thing to keep in mind, modifying the zone does not automatically send traffic through it. In order to send traffic through it, we have to make a modification. So in this case, we want to modify the internal zone to add a source. And what this tells it is any traffic that is coming from this source, send it through this zone. So for right now, we're going to add CNT serves IP address. So you need to put this exact IP address in your rule so that CNT serve can SSH into your system. So now if I look at my active zones, I'm allowing traffic from 192.168.240.103 on the internal zone, which is allowing SSH. My public zone gets everything else, but we don't want that. So now that we have our internal zone configured the way we want it, we want to modify the external zone to remove those services we don't want. So I don't want any of these services. I basically want the public zone at this point to be dropping everything. Later on in the class, we're going to make our server a server, and we'll have to add some stuff to the config to let that traffic in. So now if I look at my public zone, it's not allowing anything in. So to test that, right now I should be able to SSH from CNT serve. This is CNT serve. I'm already logged into CNT serve. My IP address is 198. You'll need to use whatever your IP address is. This should work. All right, that's perfect. That worked. I should not be able to SSH from my VPN anymore. I did not allow SSH from the VPN subnet, so this should not work. So yeah, so if we look at that, that's not working. That's probably going to time out. I mean, it's definitely going to time out. So that's what we want to do for the first part of the config. I'm going to go ahead and make the next change we need to make. We need to, if we look at our security standard, we have, let's see what we've done so far. We've done number 8, SSH must be restricted to approved source IP addresses. We added CNT serve. We're going to add another approved source in a little while. The firewall must be running and should only allow inbound access to required services. So we've already removed all the unnecessary services. The next step is to configure it to drop and log dropped SSH packets. So command for that, firewall command. This is a bit more involved command. We need to add a rich rule. Let me put this at the top of the screen so it's easier to see. We need to add a rich rule. Rich rules let you do more advanced things. So basically, I figured this out, so you can just type this. Basically, we're describing the packet we want to match. So we're setting IPv4 packets that are SSH service. And then what we want to do, we're going to specify a prefix to use in the log entry. We're going to set the log level to notice. And we're going to limit how many log entries we get because we don't want to fill up our log with we don't fill up our our log file with these. So we're going to limit to 5 entries per minute, and then we want to drop the packet. So this command should I didn't realize that was on screen. This command should oh, I forgot. What did I forget? Oh, it's not add rich rules, it's add rich rule. There we go. So that command will make it so that we log and drop SSH packets. Those log entries will be written to the var log messages. So now, in theory, hopefully I didn't test this. Hopefully it works. If I try to SSH again, I get that log entry. So you see now that I'm getting log entries uh, to drop that traffic. So that is what we want to do. So that was uh, that was number 10. All right, so to finish this up, we need to do two things. One, we want to add the other source, right? So that the VPN subnet can connect. The VPN subnet is 192.168.255.0/24. So we want to add that. So now we see we're allowing CNT serve to connect. We're allowing the VPNs to connect. What you don't see here, your IP address is not here. I did not add 192.168.242.198. So sometimes students do that. Don't do that. It doesn't need to be there. This is exactly what you need to have. So now I'm going to go test that from the VPN, and now that worked. So now that we have the changes we want, if we need to save them to the permanent config. So just to demonstrate what I meant earlier, if I look at the permanent config, you can run these commands and specify permanent, and that'll show you what the permanent config has. If we look at that, the permanent config still has those services we don't want. The runtime config does not have those services. So we need to save the runtime config to permanent. And the way you do that, -- runtime to permanent. So now if we look at the permanent config, it has what we want. So yeah, so that's pretty much the changes we need to make this module for our firewall.